I brought my 3-year-old son Teddy to that quiet coastal cove for one reason: to escape the suffocating pressure of corporate deadlines and just breathe. Sitting on the warm sand, watching Teddy fiercely defend a lopsided sandcastle with his little yellow bucket, I finally felt the knot in my chest loosen for the first time since losing his mother. Then a glass door slid open on the private cottage deck just 20 yards away. When I looked up, the air left my lungs. It was Valerie, my CEO, the formidable, untouchable woman who controlled $90 million boardrooms with a single cold glance, was standing there, completely barefoot, her dark hair tumbling loose over an oversized linen shirt. She looked softer, impossibly stunning, and entirely out of context. I must have been staring too openly because she leaned against the wooden railing, a slow, teasing arch lifting her brow. "Enjoying the view, Gavin," she called down, her voice holding a low, playful warmth I had never heard under fluorescent office lights. I didn't break eye contact. I just brushed the sand from my palms, smiled, and said, "Only since you got here." For a long, quiet second, Valerie just stared at me across the sand. In the boardroom, a pause like that usually meant someone was about to lose their project or their job. But out here, with the Pacific breeze catching the strands of dark hair across her face, the corner of her lips curved into a slow, amused smile. She stepped off the wooden deck, her bare feet sinking into the white powder as she walked toward our patch of shore. "Is that how you speak to your executive officers, Gavin?" she asked, stopping just a few feet away, hands casually resting in the pockets of her linen shirt. "I don't recall that level of audacity in your quarterly performance review." "Audacity wasn't listed under operational requirements, Miss Vance," I replied, keeping my voice low and steady. "And for the record, you're off the clock." "Valerie," she corrected gently, her gaze lingering on mine for a beat longer than corporate etiquette ever allowed. "Out here, it's just Valerie." Before I could answer, a sudden rolling breaker surged higher up the shoreline than expected. The foamy water rushed into our little perimeter, sweeping up Teddy's prized red plastic tugboat and dragging it out toward the deeper surf. Teddy let out a sharp, heartbroken gasp, his tiny lower lip trembling as he watched his favorite toy drift away into the tumbling gray-blue water. "Boat! Daddy, the boat!" I moved to step forward, but Valerie was already faster. Without a single thought for her expensive linen or the icy temperature of the morning water, she darted into the surf. The frothing tide crashed against her shins, soaking the hem of her clothes, but she kept her balance, reached down through a cresting wave, and caught the little boat by its plastic smokestack just before the undertow could pull it under. She turned back toward us, triumph written all over her face, her hair slightly damp from the sea spray. She looked vibrant, completely alive, and breathtakingly unguarded. She walked up to where Teddy stood frozen in awe, dropping down to one knee so she was at eye level with him. "Here you go, Captain," she said softly, her voice carrying a tenderness I never would have imagined the fierce Valerie Vance possessed. She gently wiped a drop of seawater off the toy and placed it directly into his small hands. Mission accomplished. Teddy clutched the boat to his chest, his brown eyes wide with absolute reverence. "Thank you, pretty lady." Valerie burst into a rich, genuine laugh, a sound so warm and unburdened it seemed to completely transform the coastal air around us. She looked up at me from the sand, her cheeks flushed with color and the cold sea air, her eyes shimmering with something deeply intriguing. "He clearly inherited his charm from someone," she teased, rising slowly to her feet and brushing a stray curl behind her ear. "Though I suspect you coached him." "Not at all," I said, stepping closer to her, so close I could catch the subtle scent of salt water and jasmine lingering around her. "He just knows how to speak the truth when he sees it." Valerie's breath hitched slightly, the playful banter momentarily giving way to a sudden electric stillness between us. For the first time, behind the fortress of her professional reputation, I saw a woman who was truly seeing me, not as a subordinate managing supply chains, but as a man. And as her gaze softened, the distance between our two worlds began to vanish entirely. Teddy fell asleep before the sun had even completely dipped below the horizon, his tiny fingers still locked tightly around that red plastic tugboat. After making sure he was sound asleep under the blankets, I stepped out onto the quiet shoreline. The Pacific had turned into black glass under a silver moon, the cool breeze carrying the heavy scent of salt and cedar.
A soft rustle in the sand made me turn. Valerie was walking toward me, wrapped in a thick knit cardigan, holding 2 ceramic mugs of hot tea. "Still managing my performance after hours, Miss Vance?" I teased quietly, taking the mug she offered. "I'm evaluating whether you know how to relax," she countered softly, her shoulder brushing lightly against mine as she stood beside me. "So far, you're failing, Gavin." "Old habits," I murmured. "When you're a single parent, your guard never really goes down." For a while, we just listened to the rhythmic crash of the waves. The corporate distance between us felt like a distant memory, replaced by a strange, magnetic stillness. "Do you know what it's like in that boardroom?" Valerie asked suddenly, her voice dropping to a rare, unguarded whisper. "Everyone looks at the title and sees authority.
But at the top, it's completely hollow. Every handshake comes with an agenda. Every smile is calculated. You spend your life surrounded by people, yet you're utterly alone, because you can never trust who is talking to you and who was just talking to the CEO. She turned her head, looking at me with raw sincerity. "Today, on that beach, you didn't look at my title once. You just looked at me." I held her gaze, feeling a sudden ache in my chest. "I know what it feels like to carry a heavy silence," I confessed, the words tearing through a lock I hadn't opened in years. 3 years ago, when my wife passed away giving birth to Teddy, the world just stopped. I sat in that hospital room holding a newborn, feeling completely broken. Every day since, I wake up terrified that I'm not enough for him, that I'm falling short. Valerie didn't say a word. Instead, she set her mug down on a piece of driftwood and stepped closer. In the moonlight, her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. She reached out, her cool fingers gently brushing against the side of my face, resting against my jaw. The warmth of her touch sent a shiver straight down my spine. "You are an incredible father, Gavin," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "And a remarkable man." The air between us charged with an undeniable, electric pull. I placed my hand over hers on my cheek, leaning into her touch.
Her breath hitched. The banter was gone, stripped away by the raw truth of 2 lonely souls finding an unexpected harbor in the dark. I leaned down slowly, our lips hovering just millimeters apart, our breaths mingling in the cool night air. The entire universe seemed to narrow down to this single, fragile breath. If moments like this touch your heart, please take a second to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It truly helps us share more of these stories with you. Just as my lips were about to meet hers, the harsh, violent vibration of a phone shattered the silence from her pocket. Valerie hesitated, pulling back by an inch, breathless. She pulled out the glowing screen. The message displayed on the lock screen made the color instantly drain from her face. It was a forwarded email from the lead member of our executive board, with high-resolution surveillance photos of us standing together on this very shore. And the subject line read, "Immediate ethical breach. Board meeting convened for tomorrow morning." Valerie stared at the screen, her knuckles whitening around the phone. The surveillance photos showed us standing on the shoreline, her hand against my cheek, captured from a telephoto lens somewhere along the bluffs. Someone on the executive committee had hired a private investigator to track her. "Gavin," she whispered, the familiar, guarded instinct of corporate survival tightening her voice. I looked at her, seeing the sudden shadow of vulnerability crossing her features.
But I didn't step back. I gently reached out, covering her cold, trembling fingers with my hand, and pressed the lock button on the phone. The harsh glare vanished into the darkness. "Don't let them take this away from you," I said softly, my voice calm and steady. "The board isn't standing on this beach, Valerie. It's just us." She took a slow, shaky breath, looking from the darkened device into my eyes. The rigid posture melted, replaced by a quiet, fierce resolve. She didn't pack her bags. She didn't flee into the night. Instead, she chose to stay. The next morning brought a breathtaking, golden coastal dawn. If whoever was watching us from the cliffs expected Valerie to panic, they were sorely mistaken. For hours, the woman who commanded multinational corporations sat cross-legged in the wet sand, helping a 3-year-old boy construct what Teddy proudly dubbed the King's Castle. Valerie had sea salt drying on her ankles,
a streak of damp sand across her cheek, and a crown of woven dried kelp that Teddy had placed crookedly onto her dark hair. When Teddy lost his balance and tumbled directly into her lap, Valerie didn't flinch. She caught him with an easy laugh, wrapping her arms around his small frame and pressing a gentle kiss to the top of his head. Watching them together, seeing this fierce, brilliant woman love my son without hesitation, sent a profound, aching warmth through my chest. "Look, Daddy," Teddy cheered, holding up a smooth, rounded pebble.
Valerie found the magic rock! It was a difficult negotiation, Valerie said with mock seriousness, looking up at me with a playful sparkle in her eyes. I had to trade 2 seashells and a promise of ice cream. "You're grossly overqualified for this construction crew, Vance," I murmured, offering her a cold bottle of water. "On the contrary," she replied softly, her gaze holding mine with an intensity that made my heart race. "I think this is the most important work I've ever done." As late afternoon bled into a fiery crimson sunset, Teddy fell asleep bundled in a blanket on the cottage porch. Valerie and I walked down to the water's edge, the foaming tide swirling around our feet. "Tomorrow morning, they are going to weaponize this," I said quietly, the reality of Monday creeping in. "Arthur Cole from the board has been waiting for an excuse to push you out. He'll call this an ethical breach to force your resignation." Valerie turned to face me. The ocean breeze whipped her hair across her face, but her eyes were steady, fearless, and filled with an undeniable passion. "Let him try," she whispered. She reached up, tangling her fingers into the hair at the nape of my neck, and pulled me down to her. When our lips finally met, the world vanished. The kiss was slow, deep, and filled with an electric certainty that shattered every professional boundary left between us. It was a silent vow, a declaration that what we had built on this quiet shore was worth fighting for. When we finally parted, her forehead rested against mine, her breath warm against my lips. "We faced them together, Gavin," she whispered. We packed the car at dusk, the heavy silence between us charged with purpose. We both knew that the moment we drove back into the city, the real battle would begin. The transition from the sunlit shores to the sterile, air-conditioned chill of corporate headquarters was jarring. By 8 o'clock on Monday morning, the warmth of the sand had been replaced by the cold gleam of polished marble and the hushed, nervous whispers echoing across the 40th floor. I was summoned to the primary boardroom before I could even sit down at my desk. When I stepped through the heavy glass doors, the tension in the room was suffocating. Sitting along the length of the massive mahogany table were the senior partners, their expressions carved from stone. At the far end sat Valerie. She was in her full armor again, a sharp, charcoal-tailored suit, her dark hair pinned in a sleek chignon. But when her eyes met mine, the corporate mask slipped for a fraction of a second. I saw the fierce protectiveness in her gaze, and beneath it, a sliver of exhaustion. Beside her sat Arthur Cole, the senior board member who had spent the last 2 years trying to dismantle Valerie's authority. A smug, calculated smirk pulled at the corners of his mouth. "Close the door, Gavin," Arthur commanded, his voice dripping with condescension. I closed it and stood at the foot of the table, keeping my spine straight and my hands unclenched at my sides. "Mr. Cole." Without a word, Arthur slid a heavy manila folder across the polished wood. Several glossy, high-resolution photographs spilled out across the surface. There we were. Valerie laughing with Teddy on her shoulders, Valerie leaning into me by the crashing surf, and the undeniable, intimate shot of our kiss against the sunset. "Our primary foreign investors are finalizing a $400 million acquisition with this firm on Friday," Arthur stated, leaning back into his leather chair, tapping a manicured finger on the glass table. "And our chief executive officer is secretly fraternizing with a mid-level operations manager, an obvious, flagrant conflict of interest. It speaks to a profound lack of judgment, Valerie." Valerie didn't flinch. Her voice was ice, ringing through the room with absolute authority. "My personal life outside the office has zero bearing on our operational performance or the acquisition, Arthur. Gavin's department exceeded their quarterly targets by 14%. There is no conflict of interest, and you know it." "The press won't see it that way," Arthur sneered, his eyes turning to me like a predator sizing up an easy target. "A scandal like this will tank our stock valuation overnight. Nepotism, secret favors." "It will tear the deal apart." Arthur stood up, buttoning his jacket, resting both palms on the table as he leaned toward Valerie.
Here is the board's resolution, Arthur declared coldly. We bury these photos and maintain the narrative of clean leadership for the acquisition, but to ensure ethical compliance, Gavin is terminated immediately. No severance, an NDA signed before noon, and a quiet departure. You keep your CEO seat, Valerie, but your little beach fling packs his desk and leaves the building. The entire room fell into a dead silence. Valerie stood up so fast her chair screeched against the floor. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with pure, unadulterated fury. You will not touch him, Arthur. If you think for 1 second I will let you destroy an innocent man's livelihood to satisfy your pathetic power grab. It is him or your career, Valerie, Arthur snapped, his voice booming off the glass walls. Choose. I stood there, looking at Valerie. I saw the woman who had spent 15 years building this company from the ground up, sacrificing everything for a legacy that was about to be erased in seconds, all because she had dared to love me. The silence in that boardroom was sharp enough to cut. Valerie stood tall, her eyes ablaze, ready to dismantle 15 years of her life's work, ready to burn her own legacy to the ground, just to shield me.
And in that split second, looking at her fierce, trembling resolve, I knew what I had to do. A real man doesn't hide behind the sacrifices of the woman he loves. I took a single step forward, stepping directly between Valerie and the predatory smirk on Arthur Cole's face. You won't have to terminate me, Arthur, I said, my voice steady, cutting through the heavy room with absolute calm. I resign, effective immediately. Gavin, no. Valerie's voice broke, the corporate armor completely cracking. She moved toward me, her hand reaching out, heedless of the 8 board members watching her every move. Don't do this. You don't have to leave. I turned to her, keeping my expression gentle, but my eyes resolute. I do, Valerie. I didn't say the rest aloud, but I poured it into my gaze. I won't let them take your life away because of me. Without waiting for Arthur's smug response or the whispers of the board, I turned on my heel and walked out of the glass room. 10 minutes later, I stood in my empty office, packing 3 years of my life into a single cardboard box, a small potted succulent, a framed picture of Teddy covered in ice cream, a pen set. Before I taped the box shut, I pulled a piece of company stationery from the drawer. My hand trembled slightly as the pen touched the paper. Valerie, I wrote, you told me that at the top, it's completely hollow.
But you are not hollow. You are the woman who dove into freezing surf for a toddler's toy boat. Don't let them turn you into something cold just to survive. Teddy and I will always remember the castle on the shore. Keep your crown. I walked down the quiet executive hallway, stepped into her vacant office, and set the folded note in the center of her massive glass desk. Beside it, I placed the smooth, rounded pebble Teddy had found on the beach, the magic rock. Then I walked to the elevators, pressed the button, and watched the polished steel doors slide shut on my career. An hour later, I picked up Teddy from daycare. The moment he saw me, his face lit up, clutching his little red plastic boat. "Daddy!" he cheered, wrapping his small arms around my knees. Then he looked behind me, his brown eyes searching the empty hallway. "Where is Valerie? Is she coming to build castles today?" A sharp, agonizing lump formed in my throat. I knelt down, wrapping my arms tightly around my son, burying my face into his small shoulder so he wouldn't see the tears burning my eyes. "Not today, buddy," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "Valerie has very important work to do." That night, our small apartment felt entirely too quiet. The clock on the wall ticked like a countdown.
If this story is touching your heart, take a moment to subscribe, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share this with someone who believes in true love. Your support means the world to us. The next morning arrived with a suffocating weight. It was 10 o'clock, the exact hour of the high-stakes, globally broadcasted shareholder summit where the $400 million acquisition would be finalized, and Arthur Cole was expected to formally assume full control of the operating board. I sat on my worn sofa with Teddy playing quietly at my feet, the live video stream glowing on my laptop screen. The camera panned across the packed auditorium. Hundreds of investors, reporters, and executives sat waiting. Arthur took the stage first, adjusting the microphone with a triumphant grin. Ladies and gentlemen, we stand at the precipice of a new era. But before we sign the final merger documents, our Chief Executive Officer, Valerie Vance, has an official statement regarding leadership ethics. Arthur stepped aside, looking utterly victorious. Valerie stepped up to the podium. She was dressed in an immaculate white suit, but she didn't open the prepared teleprompter script. Instead, she placed 2 items on the podium right beside the microphone: Teddy's smooth beach pebble and my handwritten resignation letter. She looked directly into the camera lens, her eyes blazing with an intensity that made the entire auditorium fall dead silent.
24 hours ago, Valerie began, her voice echoing through the speakers with a raw, thunderous clarity, I was told I had to choose between my career and the family I love. So today, I am going to make that choice.
Valerie leaned into the microphone, her voice steady and resolute, carrying across the packed auditorium and through the speakers of my laptop. For years, corporate culture has taught us that true leadership requires becoming unfeeling, she said, looking straight into the rows of cameras and investors. That empathy is a liability, that in order to protect a company, you must sacrifice your humanity. But 24 hours ago, members of my own board attempted to blackmail me using private surveillance photos. They demanded the firing of an exceptional, dedicated employee, a devoted single father whose only crime was showing me what it actually looks like to care. A collective gasp swept through the hall. On the screen, Arthur Cole's face drained of all color, his smug smirk completely shattering as security personnel quietly stepped into the wings. The $400 million acquisition is finalized, Valerie continued, her gaze unwavering. Our foreign partners signed the agreement this morning, under the explicit condition that leadership remains rooted in uncompromised integrity. And as majority shareholder, my first executive act today is the immediate removal of Arthur Cole from this board for gross misconduct and corporate espionage. She didn't wait for the thunderous applause that erupted across the room. She looked directly into the camera lens, straight at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Success without love is just a very expensive prison, she whispered softly to the broadcast.
And I refuse to stay in the dark anymore. She picked up Teddy's smooth pebble from the podium, turned her back on the flashes of the press, and walked off the stage. My heart hammered against my ribs. Without thinking, I shut the laptop, swept Teddy up into my arms, and grabbed our jackets. There was only one place in the world I knew we needed to be. 2 hours later, the salty Pacific wind whipped through my hair. Teddy sat beside me on the familiar stretch of sand, his little hands patting down another crooked castle with his yellow bucket. The late afternoon tide rolled in, painting the shore in shimmering amber and violet. I sat there with my knees drawn up, my chest tight with anticipation, listening to the rhythm of the waves. Then, the soft sound of tires crunched against the gravel overlooking the bluffs. A car door clicked shut. Footsteps moved across the boardwalk, followed by the quiet rustle of bare feet descending into the sand. I turned around. Valerie was walking toward us. The immaculate white corporate blazer was gone. She was barefoot, wearing a soft, oversized sweater, her hair blowing free in the coastal gale. In her hand, she clutched the little stone Teddy had found. She stopped just a few paces away, her breath catching as our eyes met. A slow, breathtaking smile broke across her lips, accompanied by that familiar, teasing arch of her brow.
"Enjoying the view, Gavin?" she asked, her voice rich with an emotion so deep it threatened to spill over. I slowly stood up, stepping across the sand until there was barely a breath of air between us. "Only since you got here." Before I could say another word, Teddy let out a joyous squeal. "Valerie, you came back to the castle!" Valerie dropped to her knees right into the sand, opening her arms wide. When Teddy barreled into her, she caught him tightly, burying her face into his neck, letting out a half laugh, half sob. "I will always come back, sweet boy," she whispered fiercely. "Always." She looked up at me from the ground, tears finally breaking free and trailing down her flushed cheeks. "I don't care about boardrooms or titles if I have to walk through an empty house at night," she said, her voice shaking with raw vulnerability. "I spent my whole life building an empire, Gavin, but the moment I met you and Teddy,
I realized I had never actually lived. I love you, both of you. I reached down, tangling my fingers with hers, and gently pulled her up to her feet. I wrapped my arms around her waist, drawing her flush against my chest. You don't have to build anything alone anymore, Valerie, I murmured against her skin. We're a team now. When I kissed her, the ocean roared behind us, but the world inside my chest was completely still.
Her hands framed my face, her lips warm and desperate with the certainty of a love fought for and won. Teddy wrapped his little arms around both of our legs, giggling as the sea foam washed gently over our bare feet. Standing on that shore, holding the two people who completed my soul, I realized that true strength isn't about power, status, or wealth. It's about having the courage to open your heart, protect what truly matters, and choose love every single day. Thank you so much for listening to our story. If this journey of courage, family, and unexpected love touched your heart, please take a moment to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that real love is always worth fighting for. Leave a comment below sharing your favorite part of Gavin and Valerie's journey. We read every single one.